Hi, this is Ellen from the Chili Dog, and today I'm going to show you how to do a knit yarn over. A yarn over is a stitch increase that is often used in lace patterns because it makes a decorative hole in your knit fabric. Whenever you see the abbreviation YO or yarn over, it simply means to bring your working yarn between your needles to the front of your work and then lift it counterclockwise over your right hand needle. And before you make your next stitch, the working yarn seems to just be dangling here over the top of your needle. You can simply hold the yarn in place with your index finger to remind yourself that you have completed the yarn over. Like every other stitch, you can see that the right leg of the yarn over is at the front of the right needle, and the left leg of the yarn over is at the back of the right needle. So now let me show you some examples of how to work a yarn over. First, let's start with a knit, yarn over, knit. Simply knit the first stitch. Then we're going to yarn over by bringing our working yarn forward between the needles and then over the top of the right needle. Hold it in place just to remind yourself that that is the completed yarn over stitch, and then knit your next stitch. And as you can see, we've increased one stitch and we have this nice decorative hole in our work. So let me show you the knit, yarn over, knit one more time. We knit, yarn over by bringing our yarn between the needles and over the right needle. Hold it in place to remind yourself that's the finished yarn over, and then knit the next stitch. Next, let's try a knit, yarn over, purl. We're going to knit the first stitch, yarn over just like we did before by bringing the yarn between the needles and over. Hold it in place to remind yourself that's the completed yarn over. And now we need to set up for the purl stitch by bringing our working yarn forward between the needles. And then purl the next stitch. And again, you can see we have increased a stitch and have that nice little decorative hole in our work. So the knit, yarn over, purl one more time. We knit, bring the working yarn forward and over, hold it in place, that's the completed stitch. Set up for the next stitch by bringing our yarn forward and then purl the next stitch. Another variation that you might see is a purl, yarn over, knit. Purl the first stitch. And before we do the yarn over, you can see that the yarn is already at the front of our work. So we don't need to pull it forward. All we need to do is go over that right hand needle, counterclockwise. And again, you can hold the stitch in place with your index finger to show that that's the completed yarn over stitch. And then we just knit the next stitch. Again, we have an increase with that nice decorative hole. So the purl, yarn over, knit one more time. We purl. The yarn's already at the front of our work, so we just need to go over, hold it in place, and then knit that next stitch. Now let's do a purl, yarn over, purl. So we purl a stitch. The yarn is already at the front of our work, so we don't need to bring it forward. Instead, we just go over the right needle and hold it in place. And then set up for the next purl stitch by bringing our yarn forward between the needles and purl. And as you can see, again, an increased stitch with that decorative hole. So let's do a purl, yarn over, purl one more time. Purl. The yarn is already forward, so just go over, hold the stitch, set up for your next stitch, and then purl. Sometimes you might find a pattern that there's not a knit or purl stitch after the yarn over. Instead, there's a slipped stitch. So let me show you a knit, yarn over, slip. So first we'll knit our stitch, yarn over just like we did before, bringing the working yarn between the needles and over, hold it in place to see that's the completed yarn over. And then your pattern will tell you whether to slip knitwise or purlwise. For our example, I'm just going to slip purlwise. And then you would work your next stitch. So let's do a knit stitch here. And again, you can see here's the increase with the nice decorative hole underneath. And now let's try a knit yarn over slip followed by a purl. So we're going to knit, do our yarn over by bringing the yarn forward and over, hold it in place, slip your stitch. Again, I'm slipping purlwise. And now we need to set up for our next purl stitch. So bring the yarn between your needles and forward, and then purl the next stitch. And there's one more combination I'd like to show you. Sometimes in a pattern you'll see a yarn over at the very beginning of a row. And this can seem a little bit awkward to work. But it's just like before. You bring your working yarn forward between your two needles and then over the right hand needle counterclockwise. Again, I like to just hold it with my index finger to remind myself that is the yarn over stitch. And then you work your next stitch. And this may seem a little peculiar to have a yarn over at the very beginning, but when you do this up the entire side of the fabric, it creates a nice looped edge. So I hope you enjoyed learning how to do a yarn over, and until next time, happy knitting!